I was standing at the altar in a $50,000 dress in front of 300 people when my fiancé leaned into the microphone, the live, hot, videographer-clipped microphone that was absolutely still recording, and said, "I know you've been selling my family out, and I know about the man you've been sleeping with behind my back." Not whispered, not slipped through a note or a text or a private conversation like a human being would do. Said out loud, clearly, in a church with vaulted ceilings and acoustics so perfect that the flower girl in the back row heard every word. His mother was in the front pew, hands folded in her lap, back straight, face doing nothing, not shocked, not horrified, not even uncomfortable. She was watching me the way you watch something you scheduled. My mother was 6 rows back in the blue dress she'd been talking about for 4 months. I heard her gasp before I felt my own body start to go. I had not sold anything. I had not been with anyone. My conscience was so clean it was almost funny. 13 hours later, Constance Hargrove was at my apartment door. Alone. No driver, no assistant. Dressed in a way I immediately understood was deliberate. Flat shoes, simple blouse, no jewelry except her wedding ring. She had strategized her outfit before getting in the car. She had thought about how to look harmless, and the first words out of her mouth were not, "I'm sorry." They were, "You cannot go to the police. Please, you need to hear me before you do anything." She said please. A woman who I had never once heard use that word to anyone below her social tier. Whatever she thought she was containing, she was already 13 hours too late. Let me tell you exactly who these people were, not for context, because the machine matters, because you need to understand what you're looking at before I tell you what it did. Marcus Hargrove, 34. Heir to Hargrove Capital Partners, a private equity firm that had, in the past decade, quietly absorbed regional banks, hotel chains, and a pharmaceutical distribution company without ever making much noise about it. He was handsome in the specific way that money produces, maintained, controlled, deliberately approachable. I met him at a charity auction where I was volunteering as a paralegal, earning $47,000 a year. He bid $14,000 on a wine weekend he had no interest in, and then spent the rest of the evening watching me from across the room like I was the only problem he hadn't yet solved. I was flattered. I should have recognized the look. It was not desire, it was assessment. His father, Gerald Hargrove, silver-haired and perpetually, eerily calm. The kind of calm that comes not from peace of mind, but from decades of never being held responsible for anything. His sister Dana, who always seemed slightly too tightly wound around me, not unfriendly, just braced, like someone perpetually waiting for a sound they dreaded. And his mother, Constance, 71 years old, never a hair out of place, the kind of woman who makes you feel subtly inadequate just by being in the same room without saying a single unkind word. She was perfectly kind to me, perfectly, the kind of perfect that, once you understand it, is more frightening than cruelty. She remembered the names of my cousins. She complimented me in front of exactly the right people at exactly the right moments. She never slipped. She never showed me anything unguarded or unfiltered or actually human. I was flattered by all of it. I was being managed by all of it. I didn't know the difference yet. We got engaged 11 months in. The ring was his grandmother's, a detail the family mentioned often, a detail I now understand was meant to make me feel inducted. He proposed in the Connecticut estate garden, while a photographer he had secretly arranged captured everything. Within 40 minutes, before I had even called my own mother, the photos were live on the family's social media accounts, curated, filtered, announced. I hadn't been asked about any of it. The photos, the announcement, the timing. I told myself it was excitement. It was not excitement. It was the family establishing the record before I could establish my own. For 18 months, I had a front row seat in that world. Estate Christmas, board dinners, galas where I was introduced as Marcus's Natalie, always in that order, always possessive. I thought it was affection. I understand now I was being placed in the story, positioned, given a role. Not welcomed into a family, cast in one. There is a difference. It took a church and a microphone for me to understand it. The morning of the wedding, the air felt wrong in a way I could not name and could not explain and kept trying to dismiss. A specific, pressurized wrongness, the kind your body reads before your brain bothers to. Priya, my maid of honor, kept squeezing my hand too hard and then apologizing and then doing it again. The wedding coordinator, Bethany, who had worked Hargrove events for years, who had been present at their charity galas and their anniversary dinners, and reportedly at least one other occasion I would only learn about later, kept stepping outside to check her phone. Every time she came back, there was something on her face she was actively smoothing away. I noticed it. I cataloged it somewhere in the back of my body. I kept getting ready. The church was the kind of beautiful that makes you forget to breathe. White orchids banked from floor to ceiling, hundreds of candles, an organ that made the stone walls vibrate. When the doors opened and I started down the aisle, I saw Marcus at the altar. I want to be accurate about what I saw. What was on his face was not nerves, not emotion, not the overwhelmed joy people talk about. It was the face of someone who has already made a decision and is waiting, patiently, for the moment to act on it. I was 20 feet from him when he raised one hand, flat palm, like a command. The organ stopped mid-phrase and did not finish it. 300 people went completely still. And Marcus Hargrove, with the videographer's microphone clipped live to his lapel, in a church with perfect acoustics, on a Saturday afternoon with everyone he had ever known watching, raised his chin and spoke, "I can't do this. I've found out that Natalie has been leaking private information about my family to journalists for money, and 3 days ago I found out she's been seeing someone else. I won't stand here and be humiliated, not in front of the people I love." The gasp that went through the room was physical. I felt it. Phones came up, first one in the back, then 2, then 5, then a row of them. My bouquet dropped to the marble floor because my hands opened and I didn't instruct them to. I said his name. Just his name. Marcus. One word, because that's all I had. I could not process what he had just said about me in front of every person either of us had ever cared about. He looked at me. And this is the part I need you to understand, because this is the part that tells you everything. He did not look sorry. He did not look conflicted or heartbroken or even uncomfortable. He looked like a man who has completed a task. He said, "I'm sorry. I cannot marry someone like you." Then he turned and walked through a side door I had never once seen opened before, like he had rehearsed the exit, like he knew exactly where it went. 300 people, every face turning toward me at the same instant. You don't know what that feels like until it happens. It is not embarrassment. Embarrassment is survivable. This was something else, something total, something that goes into your body and stays there. His father's business associates in the front rows. His college friends and their wives in silk dresses they had traveled from 3 different states to wear. His cousins, his prep school friends, his family's lawyers, people who had toasted us at the engagement party, who had hugged me at Christmas, who had shaken my hand at board dinners and called me the future Mrs. Hargrove with warm, approving smiles. All of them watching. My mother 6 rows back in the blue dress. I could not look at her directly. I tried once and had to stop. Constance Hargrove did not stand, did not go after her son, did not turn to offer me so much as a glance of apology or shock or pity. She sat with her hands in her lap and her back straight, and her face arranged in an expression of careful, neutral composure, and she stayed completely still, the way a person stays still when they are not surprised by what is happening around them. Bethany appeared at my elbow, clipboard, blazer, practiced efficiency, and steered me toward an anteroom off the side of the nave, not asking, steering. Her hand on my arm was the hand of someone doing a job, not someone offering comfort. I was still in the main aisle when it happened. A woman's voice, second pew on the Hargrove side, not even attempting to lower it. Well, if she was doing what he said, she's lucky he found out before the honeymoon. And then, and I want you to understand this happened while I was still standing there, while I had not yet left the aisle, while the flowers were still on the floor. A man's voice, somewhere behind me, said, "Honestly, good for him for having the guts." My mother heard both of them. I know because Priya told me later. I know because my mother, who has never made a scene in her life, turned around in her pew and said, with a quiet and devastating steadiness, "That is someone's daughter you're talking about." Nobody responded. The anteroom was small and cold and smelled like stone and flowers. Priya reached me within minutes. She was already texting Marcus. Nothing. Then Dana. 3 words. "I can't talk." Then Marcus again. Still nothing. His phone went to voicemail before the second ring, which means he had already declined her call manually. He was somewhere in that building, or just outside it, with his phone in his hand, watching our names come up and pressing ignore. I sat in that room for 45 minutes. Outside, I could hear the guests consuming the cocktail hour food, the smoked salmon, the passed champagne, the canapés that had been prepared for a celebration that was not going to happen. I heard the low, sustained hum of 300 people processing a scandal while eating hors d'oeuvres. At one point, someone laughed. A full, delighted laugh, the kind that meant they were enjoying this. Not a single Hargrove came to that anteroom. Not Gerald, not Dana, not Marcus. But here is what Priya watched happen from across the nave, which she told me about that night, which I have not stopped thinking about since. Before Constance Hargrove left the church, she crossed to Bethany near the entrance. 30 seconds, maybe 40. Calm, unhurried. While I was still sitting in the anteroom, while the candles were still burning, while my dress was still on my body, what she said to Bethany was, "You can release the vendors now. My office handles the invoices. And confirm with the video team that their NDA is active." Vendor release language. NDA language for the video crew, invoice routing, all of it ready, all of it waiting, while the organ was still warm. But here is the detail that came out later, the detail that made my attorney go very quiet. Bethany had received a phone call the morning of the wedding, before I arrived at the church, from a number registered to Hargrove Capital's legal department. The call lasted 4 minutes. Bethany has since said she cannot remember what was discussed. She is currently represented by the Hargrove family's lawyers. Make of that what you will. I didn't sleep. Priya stayed on my couch. My phone went off at 10 p.m. because the messages had become something I couldn't look at anymore. People who loved me, people I barely knew forwarding me the videos, strangers who had opinions. By midnight, the videos had 700,000 views. By 3 a.m., it was over 1 million. "Someone like you," he had said, in a church, to 300 people, on a live microphone, in front of my mother in her blue dress. "Someone like you." My buzzer rang at 6:52 a.m. I looked at the intercom screen and saw a black town car at the curb. I saw Constance Hargrove at my building's door, alone. No driver, no assistant. Alone for the first time in 3 years of knowing her. In flat shoes, a plain blouse, no jewelry except her wedding ring. She had removed her jewelry. She had selected shoes without a heel. She had made deliberate choices about how to appear before she got in the car at whatever hour she had left the estate. She had dressed down to come to my door at 6:52 in the morning. She had thought about the optics of her own outfit before coming to see a woman her son had just publicly destroyed. I let her up, because I needed to see her face from close range. She came in, glanced around my apartment in the specific way that is polite on the surface and is actually inventory. She sat in the chair I gestured to. She folded her hands, and she looked at me with an expression of measured, managed concern that I recognized, watching her, as the same expression she deployed at board meetings and family functions and charity events, an expression that communicated care without actually containing any. She did not say she was sorry. She said, "Natalie, this needs to stay between us." I said, "Your son called me a cheating sellout in front of 300 people and a live camera, and it's been seen by over 1 million strangers. What is there left that's between us?" She said, "What could still become considerably worse. For everyone, including you." I said, "What does the police mean? What are you actually afraid I'll do?" She said, I'm asking you to be reasonable before this becomes something that cannot be undone. And then I said the name I had been sitting on for 3 weeks like a coal in my palm. Who is Claire Whitfield? The pause was less than a second, but in a woman who had spent 71 years never giving anything away involuntarily, less than a second was a crater. The room changed. She changed. Just slightly. Just enough. 3 weeks before the wedding, I had gone to the estate to coordinate with the florist. Marcus had given me a key months earlier. I let myself in, went to the study to use the printer, and found a manila folder lying open on the desk. My name was on the tab. Handwritten. My full name. I should have put it face down and left. I opened it. Inside, 4 years of monthly financial transfers, structured, regular, routed through a company called Vantage Meridian Holdings, a name that appeared nowhere in anything Marcus had ever mentioned, to a private account in the name Claire Whitfield. The amounts were not enormous by Hargrove standards. They were enormous by the standards of something that was never supposed to exist on paper. The payments started 4.5 years ago. They ended, I checked this 3 times because I needed to be sure I was reading it correctly, 2 months before Marcus got down on one knee in that garden with his grandmother's ring and the secretly arranged photographer. There was also a letter, handwritten, a single paragraph, signed only G.H. I photographed 5 pages. I put the folder back exactly as I found it. I told myself there was a reasonable explanation. I told myself I would ask Marcus after the wedding, when things were calmer, when I had thought through how to raise it without sounding accusatory. I told myself I was not the kind of woman who detonates her own life on an incomplete picture. I was wrong about what kind of woman I was. I just didn't know it yet. When I said the name to Constance that morning, she came back in under 2 seconds. She was extraordinary at recovery, I'll give her that permanently, and said, "That matter is private and entirely unrelated to why I'm here." "Then explain why my name was on the folder," I said. Silence. Was she an employee? Someone connected to Gerald? She had an experience that my husband addressed privately. It was handled. Handled, I repeated. 4 years of payments through a company that doesn't appear in any Hargrove Capital public filing. That's not handling. That's hiding. She looked at me with the absolute bedrock calm of a woman who has said nothing incriminating in so many rooms over so many decades that it has become reflex. "Discretion," she said, "is not a crime." 6 years as a paralegal. I knew exactly what that document structure meant. I knew what payments to a private individual, routed through an anonymous LLC, without formal contract language, timed to coincide with someone's departure from employment, looked like. I had seen the shape of it in other people's cases. I had just never expected to find it in my own life. I found out who Claire Whitfield was 10 days later. Not from Constance. From a journalist I knew who made 4 hours of phone calls and came back to me sounding like she needed to sit down. Claire had been 26 years old when she joined Hargrove Capital as an intern. She was there for 8 months. She left suddenly with no announcement, no handshake, no farewell, no LinkedIn update, no trace. 2 weeks after she disappeared from that office, the payments began. She had a little girl now, 3 years old, and when you laid the child's birth against the timeline of Claire's employment and the initials on the letter and the payment schedule that stopped the moment Marcus got publicly engaged, you didn't need to speculate. The document did the work for you. But here is what made it worse than a powerful man's affair with a young employee. Here is the part that changed the shape of everything. Claire was not the first. My attorney Rita found 2 other women, both former Hargrove Capital employees. Both had signed documents they didn't fully understand in rooms with the family's lawyers present. Both had walked away with money they desperately needed, and the implicit understanding, never stated, always clear, that what they'd signed made them permanently untouchable, permanently silenced, permanently replaceable in any public narrative with whatever story the family chose to tell about them. Gerald Hargrove had a pattern. He had a method. He had a machine. And Constance had built half of it. Because here is what I eventually understood about Constance Hargrove that I could not have understood in the years when I was being managed by her. She did not merely tolerate what her husband had done. She had organized the response to it. She had found the lawyers. She had structured the payments. She had supervised the NDAs. She had decided over and over and over across multiple women across multiple years that the family name was worth more than anything any of those women were carrying. She had sat across from women younger than her daughter-in-law and supervised their silence. And then she had gone home to that Connecticut estate and hosted Christmas and written thank you notes in her perfect handwriting and spoken at galas about the importance of integrity. That was the real family business, not the firm. That. Constance opened her bag. She placed an envelope on my coffee table, the way you set down a legal document. No ceremony, no apology, just placement. Like this was paperwork, like this was a meeting. Inside is a cashier's check, she said. The amount is significant. Also inside is a non-disclosure agreement covering the documents you accessed at the estate, any financial speculation involving the family, and the events of yesterday. I did not touch it. You sign, she said, and your life resumes. The videos come down. We've already engaged the platforms. We issue a statement that the wedding was called off by mutual agreement due to irreconcilable personal differences. Your name is restored. You walk away. And everything you think you found in that folder, which you accessed without authorization, goes away. I said, you destroyed me in public in front of everyone I love. Marcus acted rashly under pressure, she said. Not, I'm sorry. Not, what he did was wrong. He acted rashly, as if I were a meeting that had gone off script. What was the lie? I said. The cheating, the selling information, none of that is true. So who built that story? Did you build it? Did Marcus? Did you build it together? She gave me 5 seconds of silence. A Hargrove giving you 5 full seconds is a Hargrove choosing how much of the mechanism to let you see. We received information, she said finally, indicating that you had been in contact with a journalist, that you had disclosed private family matters in exchange for money. That's a lie, I said. She looked at me and said, I know. No pause, no apology, no shame. I know. Like a closing remark, like she was conceding a minor point in a negotiation that had already been settled in her favor. They had known it was a lie before the ceremony. They had known when Marcus clipped on that microphone. They had known when the photographer was in position, and Bethany had her clipboard and the NDA language was ready for the video crew, and the vendor contracts were queued for cancellation. They had used a lie they knew was a lie to incinerate me in front of 300 people, on camera, permanently. I asked, did Marcus know it wasn't true when he said it? She picked up the envelope and put it back in her bag. Contact my attorney when you want to discuss terms, she said, but don't take too long. People's sympathy is a short-cycle resource. She left without another word. I sat on my couch until Priya woke up. I wasn't crying. I was in that very still place you get to when grief becomes something colder, when you understand not just what happened to you, but why, in precise and specific terms, and the clarity of it is almost worse than the pain. The wedding wasn't canceled. The wedding was a setup. They needed the church, the microphone, the 300 witnesses, and the video for one specific reason, so that whatever I said next, I would say it as a woman who had already been publicly, permanently, virally labeled a cheating opportunist. They needed the record to exist before I could start building my own. They needed me discredited so thoroughly, so publicly, that nothing I said afterward would land. They humiliated me as a strategy. My reputation was collateral they destroyed on purpose before I could use it. I want to give Marcus the easier version. I want to say he was pressured, that his mother drove it, that he was a weak man doing what a strong woman demanded. That story is more comfortable for everyone. It lets him be a coward instead of something worse. But this is what I know. The same journalist who found Claire Whitfield told me that 3 months before my wedding, someone had approached her with documents. Printed emails, supposedly from me to a contact at a financial outlet, evidence, this person said, that I had been feeding the Hargroves private information to the press for payment. The man had been friendly, professional, and completely confident in what he was presenting. She hadn't run with it. The documents were too clean, too perfectly packaged, like someone had constructed them to be found rather than actually found them. She'd kept his card. When she described him to me, his build, the silver at his temples, the gold Hargrove Capital cufflinks she'd clocked out of habit, I recognized him without needing to hear the name. Bradley. Marcus's personal assistant for 4 years, a man I had exchanged pleasantries with at every family function for 2 years, a man who had gift-wrapped my Christmas present from Marcus personally with a neat bow and handed it to me at the estate holiday party with a warm smile. Marcus had sent his own assistant to fabricate and shop fake evidence against me to a journalist 3 months before the wedding. Not his father's lawyers, not some arm of the family's legal operation. His assistant, on his instruction. That is not a son carrying out his mother's plan. That is a man who looked at the situation, looked at what I might eventually understand, and made a calculation. I was a paralegal who had gotten too close to documents that could gut his family. I was smart enough that I wouldn't stay ignorant indefinitely. The cleanest solution, not the kindest, not the most honest, the cleanest, was to destroy my credibility before I could use it. To make me someone that nobody would believe, nobody would platform, nobody would take seriously when I started talking. He had fabricated evidence against me. He had prepared a public script. He had positioned a microphone. He had used a wedding, his grandmother's ring, the orchids and candles, the 300 people who loved him, as the delivery mechanism for a targeted, calculated, permanent humiliation. He did not leave me at the altar because he was scared. He used the altar because it was the most efficient place to do it. I did not sign the NDA. I found an attorney named Rita Garza, financial litigation, 15 years, the particular energy of a woman who has watched powerful men lie under oath and personally considers it a gift. I gave her the photographs. She looked at them for a long time without speaking. Then, "This isn't an affair settlement. This is a pattern. This is infrastructure." She explained it. The LLC, the amounts, the timing relative to Claire's departure, the complete absence of formal documentation, no contract, no mutual release, nothing that would survive legal scrutiny, because formal documentation would create a record that could be subpoenaed. What this looked like was not embarrassing private behavior managed discreetly. What this looked like was a family that had developed over years a system for making women disappear. Claire Whitfield was not the only one. Rita found 2 more, former employees, younger women. All paid, all silenced, all carrying something they had agreed, in the offices of Hargrove Capital's lawyers, never to say aloud. Gerald Hargrove had done this before. Constance had managed the aftermath every time. And Marcus had grown up in that house, had watched his mother make phone calls and sign off on payments and arrange for women to become invisible, had learned from close range that this was simply how problems were handled. That's why, when I became a problem, he knew exactly what to do. He'd had a tutorial his whole life. The story published 10 weeks later. Hargrove Capital had already been under a quiet regulatory inquiry, undisclosed conflicts across a series of acquisitions. But what Rita's work added, and what Claire's attorney added when Claire formally came forward, was something much more personal and much more specific than a securities violation. Claire had kept everything, every message, every communication, everything Gerald's people had assumed she was too young, too isolated, and too broke to have held on to. Gerald resigned within 72 hours. Marcus's name appeared in the civil complaints, not as a defendant but as someone with material knowledge, named, visible, associated. The night before publication, I got a text from Marcus. First contact in 2 months. No greeting. "I tried to protect you." I stared at it for a long time, and I want to be very clear about what that text was, because I've thought about it more than I've thought about almost anything else in this whole story. It was not an apology. It was not an acknowledgement of what he did. It was a reframe. It was Marcus, one last time, trying to position himself as the protagonist of my suffering, trying to make his use of me into a gift, trying to ensure that even in the moment of being exposed, the story about him was still a story he controlled. He had fabricated evidence against me. He had sent his assistant to plant fake documents. He had stood at an altar and publicly called me a cheating sellout, using a lie he knew was a lie. He had used a church and a microphone and 300 witnesses and my mother's face as instruments of a calculated takedown. And then, when it was all about to come out, he wanted me to know that he had done it for me. That text was the most Marcus thing he ever did. Not the altar, not the fabricated emails, that text. Because it showed you, with perfect clarity, how someone like Marcus Hargrove thinks about people like me. We are not participants in our own lives. We are variables to be managed. We are risks to be mitigated. We are problems to be solved efficiently and explained later in language that makes the solver look thoughtful. He never considered telling me the truth. It would not have occurred to him as an option. The truth would have required treating me as a person capable of making my own decisions with real information, and that was simply not how he saw me. I didn't respond to the text. There was nothing to say to a man who had destroyed me and called it care. Last month, Constance Hargrove gave an interview to a glossy magazine. She sat in the Connecticut garden, the one where Marcus proposed to me, the one where the secret photographer captured the moment, in a cream blazer with her hair perfect and her hands folded, and she spoke about family resilience. She spoke about legacy. She spoke about what it means to protect the things that matter. She said, "Every family faces storms. What defines you is not the storm. It's who you choose to be when it passes." 300 people watched her son call me a cheating sellout on a live microphone. She sat in the front pew and did not move. She had the NDAs ready for the video crew before the ceremony ended. She came to my door at dawn with a check and a document, and the composed, practiced patience of a woman who had done this before. Not with me, but with other women, younger women, women who had less and knew less and had no one like Rita in their corner. Women who had taken the envelope and signed the paper and quietly, completely disappeared. That's who I almost was. That's what I almost did. The check was for $280,000. Rita told me this after Constance was gone. $280,000 to make me vanish the way Claire had vanished, the way the others had vanished. To add me to the collection of women this family had successfully buried and returned to giving magazine interviews about character. I would not have signed it for everything they had. Claire Whitfield's daughter turned 4 during the investigation. I know her name. I won't write it here. Claire and I spoke twice, carefully, attorneys present, and she was quiet and precise and exhausted in the way that you get when you have been holding something enormous and poisonous completely alone for years because you had a child and no money and a machine on the other side of you that had already made clear what it was capable of. She had kept everything anyway. She had kept it and waited and held on. Gerald Hargrove is cooperating with investigators, which means he is giving them someone above him or someone beside him in exchange for softer treatment. The inquiry has expanded. Marcus's attorneys have reportedly advised him not to make public statements. Dana Hargrove posted a photograph of the Connecticut garden 2 weeks ago with the caption, "Home." No other comment. Constance's magazine interview came out 4 days after that, and here is the last thing. The thing I did not learn until recently. The thing that landed differently than anything else. A woman I don't know, who had seen the story and done her own research, sent me a message. She included a photograph. It was a wedding announcement from 12 years ago. Not Marcus's. Gerald's younger brother. A different Hargrove. A woman, not a Hargrove, who had been engaged to him and had then, according to the announcement, mutually and amicably ended the engagement weeks before the ceremony. In the photograph accompanying the original Society page announcement, standing in the background at what appeared to be a family event, was Bethany, the Hargroves' wedding coordinator, 12 years ago. I don't know what Bethany saw. I don't know what Bethany knows. I don't know whether what happened to that other woman 12 years ago was a smaller version of what happened to me, or something different entirely, or something worse. But she took a call from the Hargrove family's legal team on the morning of my wedding and says she can't remember what was discussed. She is currently represented by their lawyers. This family has a method. It has personnel, it has infrastructure, and it has been running, quietly, for longer than I was even alive. I'm the one who almost took the check. I'm the one who almost disappeared. The only reason I didn't, the only reason any of this came apart, was 5 photographs on a phone and a name they were absolutely certain I had already forgotten: Claire Whitfield. They buried her once. They thought they could bury me. They miscalculated both times, the same way wealthy people always miscalculate. They assumed that because they could afford to make a woman's life small, they could make her silent. Constance is still giving interviews about who you choose to remain after the storm. I know who she chose to remain. So does Claire. So does the SEC. So do you. If you think Bethany knew what was planned before the ceremony, tell me in the comments. If you think this family has buried women they haven't even been caught for yet, you're probably not wrong. And if you think Marcus's text was the most revealing thing he ever did, I think so too.